So we're going to start with the major characters in Esther. So Ahasuerus, who is also called Xerxes, was the king at that time. And Vashti was his queen. Mordecai is the Jew that is talked about throughout the book. Esther is Mordecai's adopted daughter, and they are actually cousins. Okay. And let's see, then we have Esther, who also becomes queen. And then we have Haman, who is the bad news of the story. Correct. that will be good. We can boom when we say Haman. Boom. Right. And so the story opens up, and Ahasuerus was a very most of the kings during that time weren't great people, okay? But he seemed to be pretty generous because he threw a party. And it was a 180-day party for his warriors, for his princes, all the kind of the important people. 100 days, and 180 days they partied. That is one big party, and it was very lavish. They had lots of wine, but in my Bible it says no one was forced to drink. They could drink whatever they wanted. But at the end and during this time, Vashti was throwing a party, but not till the end. So there's a 180-day party. Then there's a 7-day party for all of Susa, all of the city that they are in. And so Vashti throws a 7-day party for the women, and Ahasuerus throws a 7-day party for the men. And at the end of that, it says that he was married with one, and he wanted to show off his beautiful queen. So he sent messengers. Still nothing.
It's your battery.
It could be my battery, but the batteries are probably up here. So we sent messengers to have Vashti come over, and she refused. Now a lot of people believe a lot of things about that, but that's all it tells us here. And so we'll go on from there. And he was pretty upset about this. And he went to his wise men and said, "What shall we do?" And it sounds like they're even more upset than he is, because they say to him, "Oh my gosh, do you know what's going to happen in my house when I get home? My wife is not going to listen to me at all. And so you need to do something." And he says, "What should we do?" And so she was removed as queen and sent to the women's house and never to be back in his presence again. And so after a little while, Ahasuerus started missing her. It was just kind of sad. And so his wise men said, "I know what we'll do. We'll have a beauty pageant. We will get all of the beautiful virgins from all over the country, and we will bring them, and then you can choose the very best."
There you go.
Yay! Yep, we're working. All right. So you can choose the very best, and Ahasuerus' eyes kind of lit up and sparkled and says, "Now that's a great idea." Okay. And so Esther is part of that crowd. She was a beautiful virgin. She was part of that crowd. And so as she is brought into the house, Mordecai comes and he's outside the gate, just kind of waiting, watching, seeing what would happen. Esther is given lots of favor. The eunuch in charge is so impressed with her that he gives her the best place in the house. He gives her the best maids to serve her. And then she, as all of them do, go through a 12-month beauty process. 12 months of getting pretty. That's a long time. That is a lot of beauty sleep, okay? Wow. And I do remember Brenda Peters talking to us once about that and said, you ladies may think that's pretty cool, but I've been to the Middle East when they are doing beauty treatments, they scrape your skin raw. And then they rub oil into it. And then they scrape it raw again so that you can be very shiny and pretty. And so 12 months of this, and as we know, as she takes in with her only what the eunuch suggests to her. She's not grasping at this or that. She simply says, what do you think? You know the king best. And he tells her, and she walks in, and he's love at first sight. Okay, he just is like, yes, her. That's the one I want. I want her. And so she replaces Vashti as queen. So from when Esther becomes queen, Mordecai moves from outside the gate to inside of the gate, and he is in there, kind of in the king's courtyard, and he sees two of the bodyguards talking, and he hears them, and they are plotting to kill Ahasuerus. They're angry at him for something, and so they make a plot to assassinate him. And so Mordecai overhears this, and he tells Esther. Esther goes to the king, and the king takes care of them. Off with their head. Hung them or put them on a pole, something ugly. And so it's written down in the book, in the annals of the king. Right? Then we go forward. Haman gets promoted from high up to second in command under Ahasuerus. And Haman, after his promotion, he walks out. He is so proud. He is so proud. He is so happy. And he walks out, and everybody is bowing to him. You know, they're honoring him right up until he gets to Mordecai. Mordecai doesn't move. He doesn't tremble. He doesn't bow. And his people find out that it's because he's a Jew and that he only bows to God. All right. So Haman comes out. He's so excited, and there's Mordecai, and he is not bowing to him, and it really makes him angry. And so in chapter 3, it says, when Haman saw that Mordecai did not bow or pay him homage, Haman was filled with wrath. Hatred is an ugly thing. And there's a lot of hatred in our country right now. And it's an ugly thing. Because this is what hatred did. He disdained to lay hands on Mordecai alone, for they had told him of the people of Mordecai. Instead, Haman sought to destroy all the Jews who were throughout the whole kingdom of Ahasuerus, the people of Mordecai. He wasn't happy just to get rid of the one guy that was annoying him. He wanted to remove all of them. Okay. That's what hatred does. And the king, he comes to the king, he does this plan that about a year from then, that people would be able to kill the Jews and they could take all their property. And that is why the people were motivated to come against the Jewish people, because they could get all their property. And Haman also sweetened the pot and said, I'll put 10,000 talents of silver in the king's treasury if we do this. Well, the king says, I don't know these guys. If it's true, if they're kind of troublemakers and stuff, then sure, this is not a problem. So he allows this edict to be sealed. And the Medo-Persian rule is that once it was sealed, it could not be revoked. It could not be removed. Okay, so the king signs off on Haman's plan to kill the Jews. So Mordecai, of course, hears of the plan. They send an edict out everywhere. They publish it so that everybody can come against the Jews. And so Mordecai takes off his clothes, gets sackcloth and ashes. He doesn't go inside the gate because you're not allowed to do that when you're inside the gate. And he is weeping and wailing for his people. And Esther's maids finds out about this, and they tell her, and so she gets some clothes for him. She sends clothes to him, and he refuses. And so she sends a very trusted man to go and talk to her uncle and find out what's going on. And in chapter 4, he went out to Mordecai, and Mordecai told him all the things that had happened. In verse 7, and the sum of money that Haman had promised to pay into the king's treasury to destroy the Jews. Verse 80, he also gave him a copy of the written decree for their destruction, which was given at Shushan, and that he might show it to Esther and explain it to her, and that he might command her to go to the king to make supplication to him and plead before him for her people. So, Hathach returned and told Esther the words of Mordecai. And Esther spoke to him and gave him a command for Mordecai. She says, oh, Mordecai, you don't understand. All the king's servants and all the people in the king's province know that any man or woman who goes into the inner court to the king who has not been called, he has but one law, put all to death, except the one to whom the king holds out the golden scepter, that he may live. Yet I myself have not been called to go into the king for these 30 days. So they told Mordecai Esther's words, and Mordecai told them to answer Esther. Do not think in your heart that you will escape in the king's palace any more than all the other Jews. For if you remain completely silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place, but you and your father's house will perish. Yet who knows whether you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this. And Esther told them to reply to Mordecai, go, gather all the Jews who are present in Susa, and fast for me. Neither eat nor drink for 3 days, night or day. My maids and I will fast likewise, and so I will go to the king, which is against the law. And if I perish, I perish. So Mordecai went his way and did according to all that Esther commanded him. A scary time. A scary time. There's just a lot of things going on in my mind and my spirit right now. But sometimes we think that because we're here in Lakeview. It's no big deal what's going on in our nation. And that's wrong. That's wrong. It's up to us to take a stand. It's up to us to fight. Esther had to go to the king and possibly die. And you know what? We can boldly go to the throne of God in our time of need and present our requests to Him. He invites us into His presence for such a time as this. So, Esther approaches the king, and the king looks at her and says, "Oh, it's Esther! How exciting!" You know, he was thrilled to see her. He holds out his scepter, and God is thrilled to see us when we come to His throne room. And he asked her, he said, what do you want? Even up to half of my kingdom. And the word says, ask of me, and I will give you the nations. Ask of me, and I'll give you this nation. And she was prepared. You know, this is something I kind of had missed before in this story. I've read it lots of times. I've read it several times this week. A banquet was already prepared for the king and Haman. She didn't go in and say, okay, well, would you come to a banquet and it'll be ready in about 5 hours? No. She walked in there in faith that what she walked in and asked, she would receive. And that's where we need to be, right? We walk in faith, asking, believing. He said, if we ask in His name, if 2 or 3 of you agree on a thing, I will do it. Ask in faith. And she was prepared. She had faith that she was not going to die that day. She had faith that the king would come to the banquet. And she had that banquet prepared for him and for Haman. And so they had a lovely lunch, and he said, I know this isn't really all you wanted. And she said, just give me the favor of coming back again tomorrow, and I'll tell you everything that's on my heart. And so he says, of course, I'll give you up to half my kingdom. And so they leave. Haman is so happy. I mean, he is like happy, because he had been invited with the queen. And he went out that day, 5/9, joyful and with a glad heart. But when Haman saw Mordecai in the king's gate, and he did not stand or tremble before him, he was filled with indignation against Mordecai. Nevertheless, Haman restrained himself, went home, and he sent and called his friends and his wife. And Haman told them of the great riches and the multitude of his children, everything in which the king had promoted him, and how he had advanced him above all the officials and servants of the king. Moreover, Haman said, besides, Queen Esther invited no one but me to come in with the king to the banquet that she prepared. And tomorrow I am again invited by her, along with the king. He had everything. And yet, this is what hate does. This avails me nothing, so long as I see Mordecai the Jew sitting at the king's gate. Hate is what killed Jesus. You know? Hatred, the hatred that you see in our country is blinding people's eyes to truth, to righteousness, to justice. And that's what hate does when you let it lodge in your heart. So his wife says, and his friends, let a gallows be made, 50 cubits high, and in the morning suggest to the king that Mordecai be hanged on it. Then go merrily with the king to the banquet. And the thing pleased Haman, so he had the gallows made. He got those gallows up there, and this was going to be good, because not only was he going to get to kill all the other Jews, he was going to get to kill Mordecai now. And so I love the way God does things. I mean, if I was Esther, I wouldn't take a chance on 2 banquets. I would go right for the request. But it seemed kind of frivolous. Okay, come to this banquet. Okay, we'll come again tomorrow. Sometimes that doesn't go on very well. But there was a reason for the delay. So that night, the king can't sleep. He has insomnia. So he calls his royal reader, and the royal reader comes in with the scroll and begins to read about all the things that have happened, and just happens to read about Mordecai. Just happens to read about the fact that Mordecai had saved his life. God has our back. God has our back. When we're doing the right thing, God has our back. And so he's like, oh, what? Did we honor this person? And the guy said, no, we've done nothing for him. He said, well, we need to honor him. Yeah. Is there anybody out in the courtyard that we can talk to about this? He said, well, Haman's out there. He said, bring Haman in. I want to talk to him about this. And so Haman comes in, and the king says, what should I do to show favor to someone who that has greatly pleased me? And Haman, of course, is so full of pride, so full of himself. He says, oh my gosh, he's talking about me. What would I like? This is going to be good. We're going to get the horse. We're going to get the robe. We're going to get the ring. We're going to get somebody calling. This is what the king does to those he favors. And the king says, that is perfect. Would you go do that to Mordecai? Can you imagine how his face fell? And you know what? He did not have a choice. The king told him to do it, and he could not get out of it. He had to do it. And he had to walk in front of Mordecai and pronounce to the world that this man was favored by the king. Whoa. So he goes home. He is humiliated. He hurried to his house, chapter 6, verse 12, mourning with his head covered. And when Haman told his wife Zeresh and all his friends everything that had happened to him, his wise men and his wife said to him, if Mordecai, before whom you have begun to fall, is of Jewish descent, you will not prevail against him. You will surely fall before him. Isn't that interesting? They're the ones that came up with the plan to do the gallows. Right? They're the ones that came up with that plan. But they could see that favor had turned. And I believe that the Jews had a reputation to be favored by God. I believe that they did. And so they prophesied over Haman his doom. You will fall in front of this man. And that was certainly a reversal. So right after this, they come to get him so he can go to the second banquet. And so he's sitting in there, and the king asks Esther again, so what is your real request? And she said, well, my people have been sold, and they're going to be annihilated. Said, She said to him, if they had just been sold into slavery, I would not bother the king about this. But they have been sold to be slaughtered. And the king said, who would do such a thing? And the queen says, that man right there. And the king jumps up. He's very upset. This is his second in command. He jumps up. He leaves the area for a minute or two, and Haman is so desperate, he falls at Esther and begging for his life. And of course, the king walks back in and says, are you going to molest my queen as well? Right in my own palace. And they put a hood over his head, and one of the Now Harbona, one of the eunuchs, said to the king, look, the gallows, 50 cubits high, which Haman made for Mordecai, who spoke good on the king's behalf, is standing at the house of Haman. And the king said, hang him on it. So they hanged him on the gallows that he had prepared for Mordecai. And the king's wrath subsided. And a lot of times that's kind of where we stop in the story. But that's not the end of the story, is it? Because there was still an edict out there that could not be reversed. And so the king says to Queen Esther, once again, don't miss this, she falls at the king's feet. She risks her life again. And he puts his scepter out to her and says, stand, tell me what you need. And she says, well, we need to save the Jews. And he says in verse 8, you yourselves, I probably could go to the next one. You yourselves write a decree concerning the Jews, as you please, in the king's name, and seal it with the king's signet ring. For whatever is written in the king's name and sealed with the king's signet ring, no one can revoke. And it did leave out the part about he promoted Mordecai. He gave Esther all of Haman's property, and Esther put Mordecai in charge, and then the king promoted Mordecai to second in command. But the king's response, the king gave favor, and the response was, you write a decree in the king's name and seal it. No one can revoke it. And the decree was written, and what the decree was, that on the day that the Jews were to be slaughtered, they could protect themselves. They could fight for their lives. And I'll just go on. And the end of the story, the Jews are saved, and there's celebration and joy that follows. So we're going to go to the application, and I'm going to read Esther chapter 9, verse 1 through 17. But I just want us to remember that when the enemy plans evil, God can turn it for good.
Yes. Yeah.
When the enemy's plans are evil, God is always working for good on our behalf. On our behalf. And God's delays, does it feel like to anyone that God is delayed in our national situation? Anybody feeling that? Okay. When God delays, there is a purpose for the delay. And God uses the delay. Thank God that Esther was listening and knew what to do to have 2 banquets. There needed to be that delay, that time for the king to be reminded of what Mordecai had done for him. And so sometimes the delays of God work havoc in our hearts and spirits. And sometimes people want to give up. They just want to say, okay, we've done enough. We've done everything we can do. And so we're done. But the delays of God are for our good. And so let's remember that. And I love this passage in chapter 8, where after she has asked the king for help, he says, you write the decree in my name, and it will not be revoked. We have done more decrees in the last 2 months in this church than we have done in the 20 years I've pastored. We have stood, we have decreed, we have believed that what God is saying to us is true, and that we are praying it we are saying it in His name, and that it will not be revoked. Yeah, amen. So, Esther 9 says, now on the day that the Jews were supposed to be destroyed, on that day, the enemies of the Jews had hoped to overpower them. Now, if these people had been wise and they saw the second edict that the Jews had every right to protect themselves, if they had a sense like Haman's wife, that if you come against the Jews, it's not going to go well for you, they would have done better. You know what I mean? But they had hoped to overpower them. The opposite occurred, in that the Jews themselves overpowered those who hated them. The Jews gathered together in their cities throughout all the provinces to lay hands on those who sought their harm, and no one could withstand them, because fear of them fell upon all people. And all the officials of the provinces, the satraps, the governors, and all those doing the king's work helped the Jews, because the fear of Mordecai fell upon them. That's interesting, isn't it? For Mordecai was great in the king's palace, and his fame spread throughout all the provinces. For this man Mordecai became increasingly prominent in God's favor. And I always wondered why, when they cast lots to decide when they would do this annihilation of the Jews. And it was like a year, or maybe a little bit more than a year later. And yes, it took a little time to get news out, not quite like and so it took them a little time, but there was that big gap of time, and God used that big gap of time to allow Mordecai to rise to the top and to be honored by the people of all the region, much like Daniel, because of God's favor. Thus the Jews defeated all their enemies with the stroke of the sword, with slaughter and destruction, and did what they pleased with those who hated them. There were 500 men that were killed in Shushan, and the 10 sons of Haman were killed, but they did not lay a hand on the plunder. Now remember, when the first edict was given, the reason people would come against them is so they could take their property. So the Jews had the right to do that, but they did not touch their property. That touched my heart. On that day, the number of those who were killed was brought to the king. And the king said to Queen Esther, "The Jews have killed and destroyed 500 men in the citadel and the 10 sons of Haman. What have they done in the rest of the provinces, and what is your petition? It shall be granted to you. What is your further request? It shall be done." We are the bride of the king. We have favor with the king. And he is asking, what is your further request? What is it? And I will grant it. Then Esther said, "If it pleases the king to be granted to the Jews who are at Shushan to do again tomorrow according to today's decree, and let Haman's 10 sons be hanged on the gallows." They were already dead. So he just wanted the spoils of war. They didn't steal any of their stuff, but just wanted to make certain that people understood this was evil. So the king commanded this to be done. And so just in the capital city, they hanged the 10 sons, and the Jews who were in the capital city together on the 14th day killed 300 more men. But they did not lay a hand on the plunder. The remainder of the Jews in the king's provinces gathered together and protected their lives, had rest from their enemies, and killed 75,000 of their enemies. But they did not lay a hand on the plunder. This is a remarkable story of God's favor. This book, if you don't know, God's name is never mentioned in the book of Esther. Not once. And yet you see God's hand in everything. You see his hand in everything. And after the victory, there was praise and celebration, remembrance. You'll see on your calendar that it says Purim, and that's the celebration of this actual deliverance of the Jews, and it's in our calendar. You see, what the Lord highlighted to me was that the Jews had to fight. They had to stand and they had to fight. If they had not stood, if they had not fought, they would have been annihilated. And I believe that is what God is telling us. We have to stand. When we've done everything, we have to stand. We have to stand in the full armor of God, and we have to pray with prayer and petition, and we have to fight for our nation. We have to fight for the babies. We have to fight for marriage. We have to fight for the education of our children. We have to fight for our religious freedom. We have to stand and fight. We cannot be the quiet ones that say back off and say, "Oh, it'll be okay. It'll work out." No, we're not called to say it'll be okay. It'll work out. We are called to stand. We are called to stand and believe and praise and shout and petition and decree. We are called to be the army that we are. And we are called to influence this nation. We are called to disciple this nation, to teach them what is right and wrong. Too long we have sat by and not made a ruckus or a fuss, and sat in our churches and been happy, but we can't do that anymore. The world is counting on us to stand and to fight. The Lord is with you, mighty warrior. And if it's just Gideon's army, if it's just 300, God can still win. It doesn't take the whole nation to stand. It takes the remnant, the faithful few that will stand and say, no more. No more. You cannot teach my kids this. No more. You cannot allow children to defile themselves and change their sex at a young age just because they feel like it. No more. It's wrong. And we must